Galactic Cruise. This one has been, I don't know, an up and down journey for me. And first, before I get too far, this game was gifted to me by Kenton Keys. So there is a level of bias, certainly, to this review. However, when I learned about Galactic Cruise, I knew I was going to love this game. I love Euros. Lacerda is a little too heavy for my likes, especially on a consistent basis with my game group, aka my wife. This seemed to be in that middle spot for me. The theme of running a galactic cruise line was just awesome. The aesthetic, the Ian O'Toole art, the production, at least from what I saw, was absolutely incredible. So I was so sure. I went out and got the mats. I got the acrylic bits and coins. I got all of the expansion content because I knew that this was going to be just a mainstay game for me. Much to my chagrin, it wasn't. Out of the gates, this thing kind of missed. So before I go any further, let me read what my first impressions were. This is my review. It was a 6.8. My evolution is, I haven't rated it again. That's what we're going to be doing today here. But, a 6.8 isn't awful. A 6.8 is something I will play. But I think this was, a second after my second play, essentially. I'm currently between a 6.75 and 7, giving it the benefit of the doubt. A bread and butter Euro that avoids conflict at all cost, aka the bumping mechanic, which we will get back to. This overall rating can easily drop down after a few plays to the 6s where I get rid of it. Games have been pretty uneven and have understayed their welcome just a tad. I think this can be a low interaction lover's Euro, which is an odd statement as many worker placement games tend to thrive in the hands of the pacifist. The bump mechanic will be a feature for them, however, it's a detriment for me. Games feel loose and unorganized at times due to the lack of player friction. The only really tension is the snowball game end, where the first couple years or rounds played can take up to an hour. Keep in mind, this was the first plays before we actually knew the game. And the last can be as little as 15 minutes, which is definitely true. There's definitely this snowball effect that actually happens, depending on how many goals get completed in succession. We'll get to this. A big pro and the hook to all of this is the construction of your ship and the subsequent cruise. All of your planning and strategy pays off here, and your inefficiency becomes apparent, which, as I've played it more, I am pretty inefficient. So also take that into account. I kind of suck at this game. This is where others can run away with this game and why I give this relatively high depth in my rating. A seasoned player that understands how to pull the game levers in the correct way will make short work of a newbie. All in all, this is a fun game and likely will not stay in my collection long term. This was 5 months ago. It's still here. It's not necessarily still here because I've yet to review it. It's still here because I've changed my tune just a little bit, but that doesn't mean there's not criticism still left to levy about this incredible, beautiful, relatively thematic production by Kenton Keys. But before I get into my views currently, let's see what the community has to say about this game. So first off here, it has an 86% cardboardometer. What that means, 86% of all reviews are a 7.5 or above. Good. It's got an average rating of 8.5 overall. It's the number 95 game in cardboard. It is in the top 100. So, community verdict. The community largely praises Galactic Cruise for its depth, interconnected Euro systems, which I'll debate that, excellent production, and satisfying shuttle launch moments, though some players are put off by the lengthy teach plays and relatively low direct conflict. All right, so first up, Arbuckle Burr, build ships, sell tickets, launch cruises in space. Make sure you have enough food and fuel or face disaster. A little dramatic, Arbuckle, but I'm with you. Place workers to get resources or complete tasks, but don't worry about someone taking the spot you need because you can always bump other players out of it and do that task anyway. This is a big exclamation mark we're coming back to. If someone bumps your worker, you get it back and get to take an extra action before you spend a turn recalling all your workers. It works for everyone. Galactic Cruise is somehow a Lacerda game without being a Lacerda game, which I kind of, it gives me some Kanban EV vibes for sure. Complex, interconnected systems sing and work together in an incredible, pleasant way. It's a long playing table hog, which absolutely, this thing is a freaking beast on the table, and that I simply adore. I got the opportunity to play it with the developers at BGG Spring and fell in love. Bought it and never looked back. I will be playing it again soon and highly recommend it. First of all, thank you, Arbuckle Burr, for dropping a lengthy review here. I think there's something to take from this spot here. In particular, he mentions the bumping of workers. This is a worker placement game in almost every sense. There is a grid that can connect different actions if you invest into them. But when you place a worker, you choose 2 actions, and there are 2 actions per space. So obviously kind of building this grid out and investing in your network of sorts will help. It's not really a network because you can only take adjacent actions. Regardless, it's a worker placement game. However, the thing that I love about worker placement games are the tension that it builds to race to spots. And a lot of times there's a mechanism around who goes first. You have to invest in turn order or do something to get turn order. That's not the case here. You just bump them. And the only downfall for you when you bump them is they go back to their board and they either receive 1 or 2 resources, depending on if they've invested in a particular resource. It's not a huge deal. It's definitely not as big of a deal as it is in basically every other worker placement game, where when you get a spot that is blocked, you're hosed. There's that like feeling of anxiety as you sit there and watch somebody place their worker that just doesn't exist here. And that's why in my original review, I say this is very much a worker placement game for pacifists. If you don't like direct conflict or don't like that feeling of anxiety and trying to get to the particular space, no worries. This is absolutely the game for you. All right, so moving on though, let's look at the PH Dynamic, a really complex yet beautiful game that requires you to think about multiple systems simultaneously to make the best plan for launching your rocket and sending guests on a galactic cruise. This is highly complex rule-wise, but I think learning the system is well worth it, given the elegance of the interconnected systems and fun you'll have trying to puzzle out the best moves to make. One thing I particularly like about the way workers are placed is that you are never blocked, and this is a great example, by the way. This is someone that loves this part. So, this is why I build the community insights, right? So to not listen to me, because you might absolutely love that part. I just don't. Anyways, where were we? But you may bump someone who has already taken a spot and given the workers back to them, which is another thing to take into account when choosing your actions. Some people may find the lack of player interaction in terms of conflict a bit disappointing, but I think the design is quite good at making you feel like you're competing against your opponents without being nasty. Take that situation. Very highly recommended. And this was a 9 out of 10. I didn't mention for Arbuckle Burr, same exact thing, 9 out of 10. These both love it. I think the one thing that I could comment on here is PH Dynamic really likes the interconnectedness of the systems. And I actually have a little bit of an issue with that, in that I feel like the interconnected systems are pretty, I don't know if binary is the word, but maybe very straightforward. Basically, to launch a ship, you have to have oxygen times the number of pieces on your ship or body parts. You have to have the number of food equal to the number of guests that you are flying, including your pilot, which tends to be 3 on each of these all the time, and then a number of fuel equal to the cruise that you're taking. The vast majority of what you are doing are going and acquiring blueprints. Very straightforward. Building the blueprint. This is another action. Very straightforward. There is a little module in the bottom, and I can't even remember what exactly it's for. Or what thematically, maybe I'll flash it up here, but thematically what exactly it's trying to do. But you can either take resources from it equal to 3, I think it is, or fill it back up and you get money for it. So it's like one of the main ways that you can either go get money and or get your resources to actually perform your launch, because you have to have all these things before you actually launch. To me, that's a really boring action. It's not a very exciting system. I'm fine with it. It's not the end of the world. It's just not elegant in my mind. Another action is to simply pay a money or credit or whatever it is to get 2 resources or 2 advertisements. Those advertisements are used to get people on your ship, essentially, or score those people when you land on a planet. That is a pretty basic, boring action. One of the main extra systems on this board that's not related to just building your ship is what I had already mentioned before, which is this idea of building your own technologies. You can either unlock powers that anyone can unlock, or you can pay to use those powers, or you can connect these spaces around the board, which definitely comes in handy. It's not the most exciting use of money, but it's definitely necessary. It also, depending on how many of those technologies you build, it's in-game points. That's a pretty good system, integrated all the way through. Building is connected to more points at endgame, is connected to more capabilities. It makes you feel like you're accomplishing something else that somebody else might not be investing in. That is kind of the core in trying to find efficiency in Euro games and what I like about games. But then there's this whole other side system that is like you're going and scheduling a cruise. Very simple. You have this little, like, I don't know, scheduler meeple, and you just put it on a cruise. The action is incredibly boring. You're literally taking an action to place a meeple and schedule a cruise. It's something you have to do before every single launch. It's just boring. It's not particularly, I don't know, elegantly integrated. There's another action where you then have to go pay those little marketing pieces that we had talked about, and get cruisers or advertisements. I should say you have to pay advertisements to get cruisers on, at least scheduled for that cruise, but then you also don't have to use them. You can just go schedule for any cruise, which is another kind of weird thing. You can earn some money in points there as well, or reputation, I believe it is. That whole side, like scheduling a cruise and getting people on your cruise, like thematically sort of like makes sense, but it's not particularly like interesting or like synergistically driving strategies. It doesn't lead to like feel good turns. It leads to like, oh, I just have to go do the thing. It's another step along the process. You're never taking that and going like, yes, I really accomplished something great. There's a reputation track as well that's on this board. It allows you to either get points at the end of the game as you go up through doing different things, or spend that reputation to get kind of much needed resources, which is a really inefficient way of getting resources. It's kind of a mechanism you see in most Euros regardless. All this to say is there is a very linear path in grabbing blueprints, building ship pieces, scheduling a cruise, advertising a cruise. There's lots of exceptions that allow you to kind of like break some of the rules and get some of that done slightly more efficiently, but it's all very much like linear. And going and getting the resources in, for the most part, really boring ways. The only part on this board that I am incredibly excited to always enact with are agenda cards. And agenda cards, I think up to the second play when I wrote this, I didn't realize the power of these agenda cards. These agenda cards are essentially, outside of like there's these small little advantages that basically everyone ends up getting as you either kind of unlock them on your board or on the main board. This is the key core advantage. And some of these cards are insane. Some of these cards are the thing that make you feel like you have had a really good turn. And you can kind of string some of these together and you can hoard some of these. You can turn them in for resources if you really need them, which is really inefficient use. But that module on the board, which is kind of the most disconnected thematically, is the thing in which that makes me feel so excited to play this game, is getting those agenda cards. And that, I think, is probably the secret to ultimate efficiency, is finding the right agenda card. We had mentioned that there's this refill mechanic for resources, which is boring. Those agenda cards also don't refill themselves. So you have to, there's yet another action on that board to refill that, which always feels bad because you can get to these listed resources, which is basically one of every resource if you refill them, if they're all empty, which is fine. That's not game changing. But then someone in the next turn can come and take 2 of those cards, and then the next person can take the other 2. And by the time it gets back to your turn, they're empty again. And they're incredible game changing powers. And they're frankly my favorite part of the game. I just ranted a lot on what is kind of irking me about this game. There's still some things for us to touch on, but I think there is a lack of elegance of interconnectedness in this game, but it doesn't make it a bad game. We'll get to what I think it makes it. All right, typhus fever. First of all, PH Dynamic, thank you very much for your review. 9 out of 10. Okay, so typhus, like Morpheus, but with typh, I guess. 8.5. This game appears more complicated than it actually is. I completely agree with that. Once you middle through the first few rounds and reach your first launch, everything starts to feel intuitive. Subsequent plays are kept fresh by a modular board. I do agree with that. And a variety of ship components to see. Overall, it's a fun, very well designed worker placement game with a fun theme and an excellent art graphic design. The high quality components effectively convey the game's feel and theme. All right, so Typheus, first of all, thank you for your review. Let's talk a little bit about rules overhead. And this is where I kind of, I don't know, got a bad taste in my mouth. The first couple of plays were a little bit tough. There's a lot of these little weird things about everything you need for a launch, or you can't refill the resources, or you can't refill the cards, or you have to schedule a cruise. You can advertise for that cruise, but you don't have to be able to get people onto your ship. You can pay your reputation as an example. Reputation can be spent, but you can only collect one thing as you reduce your reputation as an example. You can use other people's technologies, but you have to pay 2 credits. However, if there's more than one technology there, you have to pay 2 credits per technology cog that somebody else has used, which basically I never ever pay for. It like hardly ever makes sense. It never really gives you the resources are so incredibly tight in this game. Paying 2 money for anything doesn't ever typically feel like it has a big ROI. There's a lot to kind of teach, and I recently made a short and said that the rules overhead was just like too much for what you get back. And a lot of people took that as like, oh, the rules overhead is too much. I'm not saying it's too much. I think the rules overhead is, higher than you would expect in a mid-weight Euro is kind of like my case here. When I invest time to understand, learn rules overhead, have to teach it, remind it, all of that stuff, I expect a similar amount of depth to come back to me. And when I say depth, I mean layered strategy, replayability, especially dynamic game states kind of create depth as well. Some of my favorite games that are probably in this lane would be Barrage as an example. There's an incredible amount of depth and asymmetry that shows itself throughout the game that just really makes me so excited to play it every time. Here feels much more linear, and for the amount of rules I'm having to teach and learn, I would expect a much more dynamic game experience. That's what I have to say there. Typheus, thank you for your review. So above the timber, this was another 8.5. As you notice, we have a lot of really high scores here. A truly wonderful experience from unboxing to learning to playing to reboxing. I agree with that in general. I think the production, and I'll make a quick little aside here, as much as I complain about the rules, the rule book I thought was awesome. And by the way, the paper quality was insane as well. I think the 8-page player reference is also incredible. And the way that it was structured and teaching you how points are scored and how you win the game. And I just thought it was an absolutely brilliant, and does help this a lot and helps me get past the 6.8 spoiler to where I am today. So much thought and care went into this whole experience. Agree. The player aids are excellent. Okay, I'm sorry. I was front running your comment here above timber, and really appreciate the section where you can look up what you need and it lists the ways to accomplishment. 100%. That is incredible. Every game should be like that, by the way. Like, figure out how I go get the thing and tell me like what's the path to get there. It does speak to the linear nature of this game up to an extent, or I'll say relatively relative to the rule overhead linear nature. There's much more linear experiences out there, for sure. The gameplay is smooth and fun. Nothing tops the excitement of a shuttle launch, 100%, and we're going to talk about that. No matter whose shuttle is launching, I don't know about that. I have only played at 2 players with the starting setup. The added bot for the 2-player game is unobtrusive. Agree, it's totally fine, and works well to tighten the board and your decisions. An excellent game, and we look forward to getting it back to the table. All right, so the big thing I'm pulling from above the timber, and for, like I mentioned, thank you very much for your review, is the launch. The launch is the crescendo. It is the thing that makes everything worth it. And there's some technologies and cards that let you build 4 high instead of the normal 3, so you can get more people on there. There are rules around your time and space. If you have the matching sections in your ship, you get extra resources. That feels really good when you get to planets and your cruise, your guests can get out and explore. You score points based upon that. If they're matching in color, it's more efficient. You spend less of the advertisements as well, but that's where you get this really big bulk number of points. The trade-off is one of your workers are now tied up. So there's, on your board, there's expert workers that you can unlock that give you like some better powers. That does add to the depth, by the way. For whatever reason, I think I probably play wrong, I don't unlock those early enough or often enough. And I think a lot of times when I get beat, most people are unlocking those, which makes sense. You're doing less recalls. Those recalls, you get income when they come back and you get to take any action or an action, but it's not really that big of a deal. I digress a little bit. Regardless, the ship launch sequence is why you play this game, and it's full of fun moments, and it is the tension in the game. What I mean by that is there is a track that as you complete goals or launch ships, it starts to fill up with other people's cubes. There's this intermittent scoring, which I won't go deep into. I'm not a big fan of it per se. Regardless, that is the game timer. So as you are trying to launch that last ship that you've built and somebody else is maybe uncovering goals really quickly, that's the snowball effect that I had mentioned that can end the game, creates a ton of tension, and I love that. I love the end of this game. I don't think it paces perfectly throughout. From a tension perspective, I think it does build. I think there's some highs and lows throughout, especially post-launch when all of a sudden you have nothing left and you have to go kind of do the linear path and go get all of your resources again and schedule the next cruise, so on and so forth. But that tension that it builds towards the end, I think is really incredible. And probably the main reason why I am kind of up towards a 7.5 to an 8 on this game now. And what's really changed for me is that I have started playing on BGA. It's in beta right now. Things are making more sense. You start to know the agenda cards a little more and the technologies that you like, and I can get through games faster. Setup is easier, teardown is easier, all of that stuff. Not to say I would much rather play it in person because this production is absolutely incredible, but I've had now more instances of that end game experience, of that snowball experience. That can be really frustrating, but as the game, you are anticipating it. And that's why I mentioned in my first review, it has I think new players are likely to get completely crushed just because they don't understand pacing of the game and how fast it can snowball and the different methods to go get things most efficiently, as much as it does, as Above the Timber mentioned in the player guide, say all of that. It's an 8-page guide, and a lot of new people to the game aren't sitting there reading that throughout the game. And we talked a lot about this, but we'll just go and show kind of what the community tab here on Cardboard says. Players consistently highlight the elegant interlocking systems. This is where I disagree. But hey, developments, resources, management, agenda, company goals, and bump style worker placement that avoids hard blocking while preserving tactical choices. It does up to an extent. The game's production value, modular board, clear player aids, and excitement of shuffle launches makes setup to play and milestone moments especially rewarding. All right, common criticisms point to long setup, teaching time, and extended play sessions that can dominate the table, plus an inconsistent pacing, which I totally agree, that lead to snowballing late game runs. The analysis is likely reading my review when it does this, by the way. A subset of reviewers also feel the game is familiar with modern Euro space, that its low direct take that interaction may leave conflict-seeking groups unsatisfied. So this is perfect for fans of heavy modern Euros who enjoy engine building and multi-step optimization, players who appreciate high quality components. Totally agree. If you are a deluxe hoe, this is the game for you for sure. And satisfying milestone moments, shuttle launches, correct. Groups that like long, thoughtful sessions with tactical worker placement choices rather than direct conflict. Two-player couples or solo players who want a tight bot two-player experience and puzzle-like planning. I agree with that. I've played quite a bit at 2 players. I think I might like it at 2 players the most. So skip it if you want direct player conflict. You need short plays or have limited table space. You dislike games that can snowball and punish less experienced players. 100% agree. It's as if I designed this platform. I did not write this, by the way. This is just analyzing all of the comments on this particular game. I don't have a huge data set here, but plays over time go down in enjoyment slightly, and we're most plays logged here are at 2 players. And from a component perspective, so most people at 7 votes like the shuttle launching, technologies, developments, worker placement, basically all the same. Then comes the upgrades, expert workers, agenda cards, and resource management are all at 5 votes, and company goals, which there are goals that are very important, which I slightly touched on a little bit, and then guest management. So, you know, the shuttle launching is sitting here at number 1. So my final thoughts here. I think it's really good. I've grown to love it more. I feel like I played a ton on BGA lately. I'm starting to kind of, I don't know, wane a little bit. It might have gotten up to like this 8.5 from like an excitement to play perspective. Now it's sitting, I don't know, probably high 7s at this point. I'm between a 7 and an 8. Maybe we call it at a 7.5. So I can increase that cardboardometer a little bit. I think exactly essentially what that recap had said. I think if you like low interaction and you like this snowballing effect and you like to kind of explore little modules, you don't mind a little extra rules overhead, but you want that kind of middleweight, I don't know, medium high Euro experience, I think this is the game for you. And I think it's really good. And was it staying in my collection based upon what I had originally said where I thought it wasn't? Yeah, I think it is. I think it's staying in my collection. I think I can easily bring it back to the table with my wife now that I have so many plays underneath my belt and can kind of get us through the roadblocks that we felt early on. Regardless, it's an incredible production. And that's it. That is my review / community review. And for all of you that took part in helping to review this on Cardboard, I really am excited. I thought that went really well, and I thought those were some really insightful comments. So thank you for all of those that got picked there. And if you want to be a part of the Cardboard community, crdbrd.app. I'm changing things all the time, and I have these huge releases coming up. I need people to invest into the community. I feel like we just need to get it to this watershed moment. And I think it could be a really incredible board game community. Hopefully a really rich community moving forward. With all of that said, thank you very much for being here. Have yourself a great day.